Hello everyone and welcome to Study IQ English. I am Joycey Joy. In this video, we will be discussing about barbell strategy and agile approach. These terms, barbell strategy and agile approach, these terms appeared in the Economic Survey 2021-22. That's how this term got very familiar and popular in the news and also in the current affairs, etc. So, Economic Survey 2021-22 sets out to explain the agile approach that informed India's economic response to the COVID-19 shock. So, the agile approach, actually this term agile approach has been used in the Economic Survey to inform about India's economic response. How did India's economy responded to the COVID-19 pandemic or the shock created by the pandemic? We'll be covering agile approach and barbell strategy in detail in this video. Let's get started. Now, this strategy was tailored to India's unique vulnerabilities to the pandemic. Now, why do we say India's unique vulnerabilities? Because India as an economy is unique from that of other economies. Why? A majority of India's economy lies in the informal sector. Then MSME sector, migrant workers, small scale industries, cottage industries, agricultural sector, all these small sectors in total or on an aggregate contribute the maximum towards the India's GDP. All these factors make India's economy unique as compared to other economies in the world. So this strategy, which is the barbell strategy and agile approach, we'll be discussing about what is a barbell strategy. So agile approach, which was evolved from the barbell strategy, was tailored in order to meet India's unique vulnerabilities, especially because of the pandemic. First, as the pace of spread of pandemic depends upon network effects, a huge population inherently enables high pace of spread. That is, as the pace of spread of a pandemic, that is how fast the pandemic spreads, it depends on the network. That is how easily people get connected with each other. That's the first thing. Second one, as the pandemic spreads via human contact, high population density, especially at the bottom of the pyramid, innately aids the spread of the pandemic at its onset. That is, at the beginning of the pandemic, how frequently or how highly people gets to be in touch with each other or are in contact with each other, and high population density, these factors decide how fast the pandemic spreads. Third, although the average age is low, India's vulnerable elderly population in absolute numbers exceeds significantly that of other countries. Even though the average age is low, India's vulnerable age, that is elderly population above the age of 60 years, in absolute numbers, not in percentage but in numbers. Why? Because India is the second most populous country in the world. It exceeds significantly, or it is significantly higher than that of other countries. Finally, an overburdened health infrastructure. India has been exposed to a overburdened health infrastructure, and this has affected the pandemic and the spread of the pandemic on a large scale. Given the Black Swan event marked by sheer uncertainty and once-in-a-century crisis, Indian policymakers followed an approach similar to barbell strategy in finance. Basically, barbell strategy is a strategy which is used in finance. We will come to it, how barbell strategy is used in capital market, in financial market. So, India used a similar approach to deal with the pandemic. Why this pandemic is called as a Black Swan event? This is because of two things. One is because of the uncertainty. Second one, because of the appearance of such kind of pandemics very rarely. It's a once in a century crisis. This kind of pandemic or this kind of crisis does not evolve every now and then. It is a once in a century event. Second thing, because of the uncertainty. Because of these two reasons, it is named as a Black Swan event. So Indian policymakers, they followed a approach which was similar to barbell strategy in finance. We will see what is a barbell strategy. Now let's come to barbell strategy. I believe that it's a very important topic in the upcoming examinations because Economic Survey has very widely discussed about this strategy. So barbell strategy, it is a common strategy used in financial markets to deal with extreme uncertainty by combining two seemingly disparate legs. So it's a common strategy used in financial market. Now barbell strategy is a common strategy seen in financial market and when to deal with extreme uncertainties. To deal with extreme uncertainties, we know that financial market is extremely uncertain, and to deal with such kind of extreme uncertainties in the financial market, barbell strategy is a common strategy used there. The barbell strategy, as we said, there are two legs or two arms for the barbell strategy. One is safety net and second one is flexibility. Now, why safety net? Safety net in order to cushion the risk factor or cushion the risk factor that affects the vulnerable section. So first one is the safety factor in a barbell strategy. Second one is that it is a flexible policy. Why it is a flexible policy? It is a flexible policy because uncertainties change the dynamics of any economy. Whenever there is an uncertainty, we are not certain about anything. So anything can happen any moment. So the policies should be very much flexible in the sense that the policies should be able to adapt to the changing situations of the economy. That's why a flexible policy. Now let's take the case of COVID itself. Now COVID was so much uncertain. It was an extremely uncertain or unexpected situation for any economy, not just the case with India, but for any economy it was a hugely unexpected situation. Now, how will barbell strategy help to deal with this pandemic? The first arm of the strategy is to provide a cushion or a safety net to the vulnerable section. Now we take the case of India. There are many vulnerable categories or vulnerable sections like the migrant workers or the MSME sector, the cottage industries, the agricultural sector, the small scale employees, informal workers, street vendors. There are many categories of vulnerable people. Let us leave the case of economy from the perspective of population, elderly people, people who are sick, young people, small children. All these are vulnerable categories. Now, to provide a safety net to cushion the risk of this vulnerable category, that is the first arm or first leg of the strategy. Second one is to adopt a very flexible policy approach. Why a very flexible policy approach is required? Now, you take the case of COVID. When the COVID pandemic appeared in the country or globally, we never thought that the intensity of this pandemic or the length and breadth of this pandemic would be so high. Now, after the first wave, there was subsequently second wave, and then later many additions or many forms of viruses, many variants of the virus was found. So it was extremely uncertain. Now, in an extremely uncertain situation, you cannot make a fixed policy. That is, you cannot make a policy and stick on to it. The policies needs change. Why? Because the situation of the economy is changing, the economic circumstances are changing, and policies needs to be very much adaptable to the economic situations. So that's why the barbell strategy has a second leg called the flexibility approach. It entails a flexible policy and it is based on Bayesian updating of information. In simple words, it uses real-time data to identify, realize and mitigate the risk. Now, how is this flexibility in the policies made or brought in? It is through collecting information on a real-time basis. That is, the barbell strategy uses real-time information in order to make changes to the policy. How will real-time data help or real-time information help? This will help in identifying, realizing and mitigating the risk. Now, based on the real-time information, changes can be made to the policies. It is essentially same as the widely used Agile Framework that uses feedback loops and real-time adjustments. Now coming to what is an Agile Framework, the second leg of the barbell strategy, which focuses on a flexible policy approach using the real-time data. This is exactly similar to an Agile approach. What is Agile approach? Agile approach or Agile Framework uses real-time data or feedback and real-time data in order to make adjustments. Adjustments here refers to flexible policy changes. Flexible policy changes. Agile Framework which uses the feedback loops in real-time adjustments. In an uncertain environment, the Agile framework responds by assessing outcomes in short iterations and constantly adjusting incrementally. Now, when is an Agile framework useful? Agile framework is very much useful in an uncertain environment. When things are not certain, anything can happen anytime. During uncertainties, Agile framework is helpful because it helps in making changes to the policy based on the changes that happens to an economy. Now coming to Agile framework in detail, it's a framework for project and policy implementation that is considered highly efficient for getting the work done. So it's considered as a very effective and efficient way of doing or getting things done, getting the projects and policies implemented. It was developed in 2001 and is based on 12 principles. Now, this policy was developed in 2001, which means it's not a very olden approach. And it's based on 12 principles. So some of the important principles used in Agile framework are customer satisfaction, collaboration, adapting to change, feedback loops, breaking project silos, etc. So these are some of the principles used in Agile framework. And what was a framework that India followed earlier? Now, before we adopted the Agile framework, we used waterfall approach. Now, before we start with waterfall approach, I want to give you a brief regarding waterfall approach. Waterfall, what does it mean? Waterfall means water falling from some heights, which means that you cannot do anything on that. You have to just follow it, right? Same way, waterfall approach, very good example of waterfall approach is the 5-year plans adopted by India. During the 5-year plan period or planning era, we used to make 5-year plans, which is considerably a medium-term plan. So we used to make 5-year plans, and for the 5 years, we used to stick on to the plan. Whatever happened in the economy, the plans were not flexible. They were rigid plans, and we used to stick on to the plans. And whenever there were extremities or whenever there were uncertainties, we used to drop the plan and then adopt a plan break or a plan holidays. Otherwise, 5-year plans were adopted for a period of 5 years, and we used to follow the 5-year plans without any flexibility in place. So that was 5-year plans. And it's a very good example of waterfall approach. So before we adopted this Agile framework, earlier we used to adopt a waterfall approach. Now under this, it involves analysis of the issue, a detailed planning and meticulous implementation. Now very good example is the 5-year plans India adopted. Waterfall framework is linear and it is developed systemically from phase to phase. Why it is linear? It's on a single line. Why? Because there are no diversions or no flexibilities available with the waterfall approach. There are no flexibilities or diversions available with it. It is said that this approach works best for projects with concrete timelines, well-defined deliverables and little uncertainties. Now, when is a waterfall approach useful for implementing projects or programs? When there is very less or minimum uncertainties. Why? Because it's a rigid plan which has to be followed. Now, if there are uncertainties, it needs to be flexible. So, waterfall approach can work in an environment with very less uncertainties than a concrete timeline. That is a timeline for achievement of a goal or a purpose, and defined deliverables. Defined deliverables means when the goals are predetermined and quantified. When the goals are quantified and predetermined, and also when there is a concrete timeline. That is for achieving the goal. Now, how did government put Barbell strategy to use? Now, how did government use Barbell strategy at the time of COVID-19? The intensity of the COVID-19 pandemic called for rapidly changing policy. As I already discussed, the pandemic was not similar at all times. It kept on changing. There were different phases of the pandemic, different variants appeared. So it was much changing in nature. And the policies also needed to be changing or flexible in order to meet the needs of the people. The ever-mutating course of the virus made waterfall approach unfit. Why? Under a waterfall approach, policies are rigid and which could not be changed often. So, the ever-mutating course, that is the first wave, second wave, then after that different variants of the virus, all this made the waterfall approach unsuitable for the economy. Understanding the threat posed by the virus, government decided to shift from waterfall framework to barbell strategy. So government decided to shift from waterfall strategy or framework to barbell strategy. Hence, government adopted two pillars of supply side barbell strategy, supply side barbell strategy. On one hand, it focused on creating flexibility. So first arm is creating flexibility in the economy through deregulation and reforms. Second one is improving resilience, that is providing safety nets. We have already seen the two arms of the barbell strategy. Improving resilience by providing safety nets, especially through fiscal policies like the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, PLI, production linked incentive scheme, etc. So safety nets were provided, especially focusing on the vulnerable groups. So these two arms were adopted by the government. Now let's see what are the measures adopted. The flexibility of the agile approach improves responsiveness and aids evolution, but it does not attempt to predict the future outcomes. And this is why the other leg of the barbell strategy is also needed, that is cushioning for unpredictable negative outcomes. That is, the government has to provide a safety net to the vulnerable groups to cushion the risk factors. So many programs were adopted. First one, cash transfers through Jan Dhan bank account, then food security program, employment generation program, MSME sector was given 6 months moratorium, then credit programs were announced. Many programs were announced by the government under the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan was a fiscal stimulus package announced by the government during the pandemic. Now let's also understand why is Agile Framework preferred today. It is very relevant today because it gives a exposure to the real-time data. When we use real-time data, constant monitoring is very easy. And when monitoring improves, implementation also improves. Improves implementation as well. Over the last 2 years, government leveraged a host of high-frequency indicators. What is meant by high-frequency indicators? High-frequency indicators helps to get real-time data. Let us take, for example, the traffic in a restaurant or the traffic in a bus station. All these are high-frequency indicators. Now, for example, when there is a huge crowd in the bus station, it means that people are moving constantly. When there is empty spaces in the bus stations or when there is very less population in the bus station, it means that people are not moving out. All these are real-time data. These are high-frequency indicators. So this will help in better policy making by understanding the response of the people. Like, for example, certain examples are given: GST collection, digital payments, satellite photographs, electricity production, cargo movements, internal and external trade, infrastructure rollout, delivery of various schemes, mobility indicators, etc. These are all examples of high frequency indicators. So this high frequency indicators helps the policy makers to tailor their responses to an evolving situation rather than relying on predefined responses. Under waterfall approach, the response was predefined, that is, an approach was set up. But under this barbell strategy, tailor-made response, that is, responses or the policies are tailor-made to suit the current situation. So that's how agile approach is preferred today. So that's it about barbell strategy and agile approach. It's a very, very important topic for all the upcoming examinations because it has appeared in the economic survey, and economic survey has discussed it in very detail. That's why it's a very important topic. If you remember, last year's economic survey discussed about the V-shaped economic recovery, and the question appeared in the UPSC Civil Services Mains examination. So whenever economic survey highlights a topic, it is also an indication that in the upcoming examination there can be a question regarding that. Keeping that in mind, I hope this was a useful one for you and I delivered a good content to you. Thank you so much. I see you again in the next video.